While we're just hanging out, I'll just say recite. When I was like 16, I'll tell a real quick story. When I was like 16, maybe 15, I really hated school. And my English teacher, I never would steal things. I was always very afraid of getting caught of stealing things. But there was a bunch of textbooks, and I hated school. So there was a bunch of textbooks in the back of my teacher's classroom um, that were all poetry books. And for some reason, it was almost like they were shining like a golden nugget or something. I looked back there and I was like, what is that? And I opened this poetry book, it was like this big, and I found this excerpt that I'm about to recite. And then I forgot about it. I memorized it when I was 15. And then when I was 34, I was at dinner with a partner, and it just like sprang back into my mind. And it's one of my favorite quotes. And it's from a poem called St. Francis in the Sow by a man named, I think, Gal Kenway. It's just the first part. It's a long poem. But it says, the bud, so like the plant bud, the bud stands for all things, even those things which do not blossom, for everything flowers from within of self-blessing. Though sometimes it is necessary to reteach a thing its loveliness, to put a hand on the brow of the flower and retell a thing in word and in deed it is lovely until it flowers again from self-blessing. So there's something to fill the time.
And that was the loveliest way to start that I could imagine.
That was
And
beautiful.
I kind of
Thank
promised
you,
myself I wouldn't cry during this event.
Oh, that's awesome. That was awesome and totally unplanned and perfect. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And with that, are you moderating the chat, Kel?
Yeah, Golden, what is the name of that poem? Do you know?
I think the name of the author, I forget. It's something like Scottish, but the poem is called Saint Francis and the Sow, like a pig.
Oh, okay.
You can probably find what it is.
Yeah, I think if you Google it, it's relatively famous.
All right, you guys ready to start?
Let's start.
Okay.
That's your cue, Lee.
Yeah, so welcome everyone to Zines Right Now, a panel that is part of New York Queer Zine Fair. What is wrong with me today? The words are right in front of me. My name is Lee. I'm from Brooklyn Public Library, and I just wanted to let you all know we're recording this. I also have all attendees muted with your cameras off. It just makes things run more smoothly. We will be doing a Q&A at the end, so you can either wait until the end to put your questions in the chat, or you can put them in as you think of them, and we'll be collecting them, and probably won't get to answer everything, but we'll get to answer as many as we can. So we'll be doing that. And I also wanted to acknowledge, even though this is virtual, we are Brooklyn Public Library. We are gathered on the unceded homeland of the Lenape people. Please join me in acknowledging and paying our respects to this community, their members past and present, as well as all future generations of Lenape people. Brooklyn Public Library acknowledges that it was founded on the intentional exclusions, genocide, and erasure of the Lenape. We are committed to working to dismantle the ongoing legacies and repercussions of settler colonialism. This acknowledgement is only the beginning of this critical effort. And now I will turn things over to Paul.
Thank you, Lee. And I'm so glad that we had that acknowledgement at the beginning. First, I should say good afternoon to everyone, assuming that you're on Eastern time. If not, good morning, good evening, wherever you are. Do we have slides? I don't know if we need slides up right now, but I'm gonna let Lee handle that. For those of you, I'm assuming everyone here is familiar with New York Queer Zine Fair because you've been on our Instagram or something and found out about this, but just a brief introduction. New York Queer Zine Fair was started in 2015 as a sort of 2-hour Thursday night event that was part of the programming for an exhibition that Charlie Welch and I had at the Bureau of General Services Queer Division, who have continually been very supportive of New York Queer Zine Fair. And we've held it annually ever since. After our 4th year, Charlie moved on to other projects and also left New York. But that led to my asking Kel Karpensky, who's right there on my screen, to help organize the fair with me. And one great thing that has come of our working together on the fair is the fair moved to the Brooklyn Public Library. We've had one iteration there, which was fantastic. And we were very much looking forward to a sort of grander version of the fair this year at the library. But as we all know, everything in the world changed. And I will say that I think it was in April, Kel and I were having a walk through Greenwood Cemetery, and we were sort of like, we'll be able to have the fair in person by October. And as it turns out, that was not the case. And it's strange that even right now, we are asking ourselves about, are we going to have it in the library next year? And it's a very strange question to be asking ourselves. And but despite not being able to meet in person, we are very happy to be having a virtual fair this year. It has been really successful. We've had a lot of participation. And we hope that the next several weeks, as we continue to post people's pictures, add things to the website, and host a couple more events, that that the zine community that we're hoping to shine a light on basks in that light, I guess. With that, I have a little note here that I want to read. We're living not only through a pandemic, but a time of increasing visible social inequality and state violence, global pandemic, and a deepening descent into the virtual world. For people of color and queers and artists, this is a time rife with things to make work about, as well as a time when it is very difficult to make work. And I should also throw in a difficult time to share work. And that is sort of a background against which we are meeting. And with that, I do want to introduce our 3 panelists who have all supplied me with great bios, which I will read. I don't know if there's a way to highlight people as I do this, but I'll leave that to someone else. Our first panelist is Camilo Godoy. Camilo is an artist and educator born in Bogota, Colombia, and based in New York. He is a graduate of the New School with a BFA from Parsons School of Design, 2012, and a BA from Eugene Lang College of Liberal Arts, 2013. Godoy was a 2018 session artist, 2018 artist in residence at Leslie Lohman Museum, 2018 artist in residence at Coloseo Moraes Barbosa, forgive my pronunciation, 2017 artist in residence at the International Studio and Curatorial Program, 2015 to 2017 artist in residence at Movement Research. His work has been presented in exhibitions at the Brooklyn Museum, CUE, Dance Space Project, Muson Term in Frankfurt, the Toronto Biennial, and he is currently on view at UNSW Galleries in Sydney and the Moody Center in Houston. Our second panelist is Golden Collier, a Philadelphia-based multidisciplinary artist who has been honing their printmaking skills for the past several years. They are currently a fellow and keyholder member of Soapbox Community Print Shop, a 2020 Broken Pencil Grant recipient, and has had recent shows in Seattle, Oakland, New York, and Toronto. Through Diasporan's Savant Press, they create print works elevating marginalized members of the African diaspora, including, but by no means limited to, folks in recovery, folks of size, TGNC folks, queer folks, disabled folks, working class folks, poly folks, children and youth, and elders. They're working on an anthology of interviews with Black non-binary people, and as a documentary fellow for Scribe Video Center, we'll be creating a documentary exploring the perspectives of folks at the intersections of Blackness, queerness, non-binary identity, and more. Great. And our third panelist is Brandon Dean, born and raised in Montgomery, Alabama. Through painting, photography, zines, and other media, Dean explores themes of identity, visual representation, historicity, and the places where these spheres intersect. He received his BFA from Auburn University and MFA in painting from the Tyler School of Art at Temple University. Brandon has been featured in many regional and national exhibitions, including recent shows at the University of Maryland, the Alabama Contemporary Art Center, and the Arlington Art Center, among others. Current projects include the ongoing Southern Exposure Zine series. Brandon currently lives and works in Cleveland, Ohio. And so with that, I'd like to go around to the panelists, and I guess we can do them in that order: Camilo, Golden, Brandon. If you would throw out at the beginning what pronouns you prefer, and then also sort of just give us a check-in about what it's been like the past several months of pandemic, quarantine, sheltering at home, and how that's affected your work or your life. And we'll start with Camilo.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you, Cal and Lee, and everyone for joining and for making space in your schedule on this Saturday. Here in New York is fairly sunny and a bit chilly. And before I joined you all, I went for a little walk. I go by he, him pronouns. And these last few months, as we all have been experiencing, have been a true roller coaster. We are in a pandemic. We are living through an energized racial uprising, and we are in the middle of a election that in a few weeks will, I don't know, send us through seismic, catastrophic futures. So it's been quite tough to find time to focus on my own personal work. I survive as an educator, so I pay the bills by teaching at different organizations. So I've been in front of a computer for a lot of times for the last few months, which is a privilege to be able to have a steady income, and that a lot of educational opportunities have adapted to this new way of learning and teaching. So I felt pretty stable on that end. But you know, those first few months of being sheltered in place were pretty just tough. You know, we were all. I remember listening to the sounds of ambulances a lot, and thinking of that sound reminded me of just the awful moment that we were witnessing in the months of April, March, certainly April, and May. So as an artist, I took just time those few months of being sheltered in place to just slow down. I personally loved seeing my calendar all of a sudden just like have a lot of things disappear from it, because there were so many cancellations of deadlines or performances or exhibitions that I was participating in. On the one hand, it was obviously tough to like confront the fact that some gigs as an artist were being postponed or canceled. But personally, I really loved seeing days on my calendar where I had nothing to do besides like teach one class or do some curriculum development. So those few months I just enjoyed doing a lot of self-care, cooking, being with my boyfriend, and taking care of my plants, reading, and just enjoying having the time to focus on myself. And I'll pass the microphone to you, Paul.
Golden, do you want to, I'd love to hear about what you've been doing during these months.
I'm Golden. My pronouns are he and they, and it's been complicated. I mean, I think I mostly make my living as like a kind of touring artist, like gallery shows and fests and stuff like that. And so a lot of the work I do in production is like done in my studio. I have a printmaking studio here, and then I have a home studio. And it's done kind of on my own by myself. So it's really a necessary part of my livelihood. Something I've realized from having so many of those opportunities kind of just like evaporate, which is really disheartening, in addition to all of the other really hard to take parts of the pandemic, and all of the violence that's been happening, was that I realized that, I don't know, getting packed up and going and hauling my shit all around, wherever to go and do shows is always such a logistical nightmare that's really hard to do, and can be kind of, has its own costs, physically and just kind of time-wise. But I get so much from doing that. I get so much from being at fairs, being at shows, seeing people. It's like not just the loss of income, but I think what I've really realized too is this loss of a chance to interact with people about my work, and all different kinds of people, and a chance to see my friends who live all over, see them in person. Because even though I feel really glad that it's not like 1910 and I'm writing people letters 2 weeks to get them back to find out how they're doing, I can be on here with you all over the world. That's beautiful, but it's not the same as seeing people in person. And so it's been really challenging to find ways to, I can't replace that, but like as an artist, keep myself, provide some sense of like community, of creating community, of being with other people, of keeping my mental health together to just even be able to make work. I mean, I think it's just been really frightening. It's just this kind of wave, to be making art, and particularly any kind of politically engaged art. It's like a privilege. It's beautiful. It's what makes my soul and spirit like rise. And at the same time, it's away from my practice. It's kind of horrific, in a lot of ways. And I think there's just been so much like suffering for people. It's my art and my practice has been a part of what's kept me well, but it's a strange time. I mean, I really was so thankful, Paul, when you reached out about this panel, because I do think it's just such a strange time to be trying to get work done, particularly as creators of color, particularly as like marginalized people, particularly as like, Black and brown people, particularly as like a lot of the people that I end up making work for. It's just like right now, people are just getting shuffled hard, and so it's been okay. I'm here.
It is a strange time, because I think as artists, you need sometimes strife and chaos help your work. They like, I think it like fuels your ideas, but at the same time, one needs stability in order to make work. You need like a little safe place. You need to know that you have some money in the bank, or you have some food in the fridge, and that kind of thing. And at the same time, one needs solitude to make work, but also you need an audience. And I feel like these tensions always already exist for an artist. And I feel like right now, those tensions are so exploded.
Yeah, I agree.
Brandon, did you want to answer the question? How have you been doing?
Well, hi, I'm Brandon. I go by he, him. So this has been a very like weird year, even notwithstanding the pandemic and even like everything that's happened over the summer. I sort of relocated to Cleveland from Philadelphia like 1 week before lockdown. So it's been this sort of experience of like experiencing like layered effect of isolation, just sort of having to sort of like establish yourself in a new place, and then suddenly like everyone and everything is sort of at a standstill, and you kind of feel like you're adrift in a spaceship, like watching things become increasingly dystopian. So it's been kind of a balancing act between being in a new place for the sake of making work easier, making like artwork easier, but also realizing that you're doubly isolated. So for me, it's been a lot about trying to balance sort of like just developing things that, you know, sort of benefit me long term, like, oh, learning new skills and taking time to sort of like enjoy like little simple things. I think I went through the entire like quarantine meme of like learning how to like bake things and learning how to like, you know, I've done all of it. But I think that over the past like few months, I've had to sort of really think about balancing like how do I um, advocate for issues while also balancing wanting to be safe and wanting my family to be safe. So there's been a lot of sort of like thinking about making work and putting it out there in more immediate ways while also taking out the sewing machine and making masks for my family in Alabama, like balancing trying to sort of do all of these things at once. It's, I guess, somewhat exhausting, but it also is like time has started to feel immaterial in this period. So it's kind of like, well, it's just a day. The days kind of come and go, and you just have to sort of do what you can during the time you have. So for me, it's been weird. It's felt a little bit like being in like the space station looking at the planet go through all these changes, just because I'm not really as familiar with the place I'm in now. But I think that ultimately it's going to lead to, I think, something more positive. I'm choosing to believe that like because of what the pandemic has like laid bare about like the way our society is structured, it's going to ultimately be something that like benefits us long term, because we will no longer be in this sort of like shared delusion that like you know, a rising tide is lifting all boats and all those sorts of like ideas that get peddled by people who already benefit from the system as it is. So that's kind of where I'm like landing in terms of my like state of mind about this year.
Well, I think
Brandon, I feel you so hard. I fucking moved to Philadelphia. You moved to Cleveland right before it. I moved to Philadelphia right before. We probably like passed like ships in the night. It's so strange being in a new place doing this thing. It's just like, where am I? What is this place? You know, everything's closed. You can't, you know. Anyway.
I mean, I think it's just a disorienting and strange time, and but I think that one thing that I have had the good fortune to do during this sort of shutdown is look at zines, and I think anyone who collects zines know it's very easy to have a stack of zines that you have not looked at,
Exactly.
and which brings me to the next part of our panel, which is I'd like to briefly go through with all of you and talk about your work. I'm going to start with Brandon, and I have a couple slides ready, and Brandon makes a series of zines called Southern Exposure, which I think that, Brandon, you could sort of talk about
Sure.
as well as this is from the first issue of Southern Exposure, which is about the Confederate flag. And I would love it if you wouldn't mind reading it, Brandon, and sort of talk about your project and also sort of where this fits, because this came out a couple years ago, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
And I think it kind of came out sort of just before the most recent sort of explosion in this as a topic. So if you wouldn't mind reading it and maybe commenting.
Sure. Yeah, I'll pull it up on my own hard copy. As a Southern Black man, the symbol of the Confederate battle flag exists as an embodiment of ugly and contradictory narratives. One narrative is in my blood, knowing the cause for its creation and secession of Southern states in the first place was to keep my ancestors enslaved and the economy they sustained intact. The other narrative is in the air of the South, blaring as if via loudspeaker that the symbol is only one of Southern pride. That somehow the very point of its existence is no longer relevant to its contemporary place in pop culture. And to that end, through commercialism and whitewashing, often not mutually exclusive, the symbol is assumed to ascend beyond its origins in racism and subjugation. All the while, there sits this symbol, this alluring design that in its purest state asks only for your desire. I find myself drawn to its effectiveness as a design and sickened by what it represents. I lived in an environment where I was meant to be subjugated by this symbol and not lay claim to any form of ownership over it. I wanted to exert a will of my own into its use, reintroduce mixed signals that revisionist history seeks to erase. These images are complicit with the Confederate flag as its aesthetic power, but pulling it from its historical moorings and defining a new agenda in direct conflict with its unsettling past. So that was just sort of like a blurb I wrote, sort of trying to contextualize the images that are in this zine, which are sort of superimposing designs that are kind of extrapolated from the Confederate battle flag onto figures and scenes. And part of me wanted to create something that was in response to like where I was from and where I grew up, which is in the South in Alabama, and sort of like a symbol that sort of like was always present in my like daily life, but I was never allowed to sort of take ownership of the image as something that I could use. It was always something that was supposed to be used on me, something that I was supposed to experience and not have any control over how it manifests in my life. So for me, it was kind of like a project I started right after grad school. So 2012, I was making work with the Confederate flag, and sort of like years before like Charlottesville and the Unite the Right rally that really kind of like touched off this huge national conversation about it. And at first it was sort of like talking about an issue that people seemed to think was a very remote, like distant problem. Like, I mean, I was making this work in Philadelphia, showing it in Philadelphia and in New York and in DC, and people were like, isn't it crazy that there's still Confederate flags being, shown, on trucks in the South? It's like so crazy they're still doing that. I'm like, you can just, drive 10 miles out of this town and see. It's not hiding. It's not like far away. And so like, it's been interesting seeing that shift from making this before people were really like nationally thinking about it in terms of like something to be done about, like something to be really like addressed. And then like having this zine sort of still exist while all of it started to sort of bubble up in national consciousness has been really like interesting. But I think that it's something that I've welcomed, that there's this like new renewed energy in like addressing these like old symbols of like a racist past that we still kind of like decide are okay to be around us every day.
And one thing you do in the zine, which I think, and there's more text in the zine, as well as images, but, and we can kind of even go to I've selected 2 images from the zine. One thing that I think is really interesting about the zine is that you talk about your emotional reaction to this as a symbol, but you also, as an artist, address its sort of success as a design. And there's, in a previous part of the zine, there is sort of like a description of how a flag should work formally. And I love that tension that you create. And then the photographs are the flag sort of projected, not in a literal sense, but in a figurative sense, I guess. It's not exactly the flag, but it is the flag enough on different kinds of bodies, different kinds of skin. And one question I have is, when you were working on this, do you think that there is a different meaning to project? Like the image we're looking at right now is actually the back cover, which is a person of color who's sort of prone that stretches across the front and back cover. And I should say that's a beautiful zine, and it's just like a pleasure to look at. But and then one of the images inside is a white guy with the same images projected over him. And I'm wondering if you felt that there was, what the difference is about these 2 bodies with this image projected on it, or if there is a difference.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I've always been very careful about the use of like Black and brown bodies with this particular imagery in particular, because I feel like if 2020 has shown anything more salient, is that like Black and brown people have been doing like overtime for decades explaining our legitimacy as like people deserving to exist, and explaining like the history of white people to white people, and explaining, you know, why we deserve the same rights and all these things. And I feel like that's like exhausting enough that I don't really feel like I should be using more Black bodies in the service of educating white people about themselves. So I feel like I should use white people to teach white people about white people. So I think that that's kind of the perspective I come from. And I think that when it comes to how they differ, is I guess I personally feel that exhaustion when I use the Confederate symbol on the Black bodies. And I feel like that's the difference in how they're portrayed in the work that I make. So I feel like I'm using white figures sort of as an arbiter of like representing the history that they benefit from. And I feel like when I use Black bodies, it's sort of like, here I am explaining this to you again. There's a sort of disconnect in terms of like the level of not necessarily agency, but the level of universality that I'm like employing. I feel like the white figures sort of almost act as placeholders of a representation of like the history they benefit. And with Black figures, it's sort of like, here I am as an example of like how you change your perception when you know Black figures are affected by something.
I think that Lee is trying to move on to the next image, which shows, I don't know. There we go. I just want people to see. That's really interesting. And I think that this is something that I struggle with as an artist of color too. Like, how do you use bodies, and whose bodies do you use? And I often feel like I'm always arriving at the wrong answer. But I'm really glad to hear you talk about this. I think that we can move on to Golden's. There we go. So Golden, this is a page from your zine, The God Within, Black Queerness Across the Diaspora. I would love it actually if you also read this passage and sort of introduced it. And then I'll have a couple follow-up questions, I'm sure.
Yeah, definitely. This is a poem by a woman named Pat Parker. She was a Black lesbian in the Bay Area. I'm not sure if she's from there, but that's where she really cut her teeth at. And most of her well-known work is from when she was living there at that time. She was a contemporary of Audre Lorde's and a friend of Audre Lorde's. And this poem is called My Lover is a Woman. It's very second wavy. I love it. My lover is a woman, and when I hold her, feel her warmth, I feel good, feel safe. Then I never think of my family's voices, never hear my sisters say, bulldaggers, queers, funny. Come see us, but don't bring your friends. It's okay with us, but don't tell mama, it break her heart. Never feel my father turn in his grave, never hear my mother cry, Lord, what kind of child is this? 2, my lover's hair is blonde, and when it rubs across my face, it feels soft, feels like 1,000 fingers touch my skin and hold me, and I feel good. Then I never think of the little boy who spat and called me nigger. Never think of the policeman who kicked my body and said, crawl. Never think of Black bodies hanging in trees or filled with bullet holes. Never hear my sisters say, white folks' hair stinks. Don't trust any of them. Never feel my father turn in his grave. Never hear my mother talk of her backache after scrubbing floors. Never hear her cry, Lord, what kind of child is this? 3, my lover's eyes are blue. When she looks at me, I float in a warm lake, feel my muscles go weak with want, feel good, feel safe. Then I never think of the blue eyes that have glared at me, move 3 steps away from me in a bar. Never hear my sister's rage of syphilitic Black men as guinea pigs, rage of sterilized children. Watch them just stop at an intersection and stare, the old white bitch. Never feel my father turn in his grave. Never remember my mother teaching me the yes sirs and ma'ams to keep me alive. Never hear my mother cry, Lord, what kind of child is this? 4, and when we go to a gay bar and my people shun me because I cross the line and her people look to see what's wrong with her, what defect drove her to me. And when we walk the streets of this city, forget and touch or hold hands, and the people stare, glare, frown, and taunt at those queers, I remember every word taught me, every word said to me, every deed done to me, and I hate. I look at my lover, and for an instant I doubt. Then I hold her hand tighter, and I can hear my mother cry, Lord, what kind of child is this? And that's Pat Parker's, My Lover's a Woman.
I mean, I found it powerful when I read this, but to hear it read is also just very moving. I had selected this page because I feel like it addresses a lot of intersectionality and the complexity that can exist within a single person. And I was also interested in this as an example of how, in a lot of your zine work, you are finding ephemera, finding texts and sharing them, and it's almost through this sort of collage or montage of ideas, you're creating a much larger picture. And that's very powerful. And I guess I wanted to ask you sort of about that process. I also have, I would love for you to talk about intersectionality. I have a million things I could ask you about this. And maybe we could even move to there's a picture of the cover, which I also really like. And I also kind of would love to briefly ask about the title, The God Within, Black Queerness Across the Diaspora, across the diaspora. Because it touches on something that I am personally interested in, which is, I'm a person of faith, I'm a practicing Catholic, and I'm always a little tentative about bringing up God questions. especially because I feel like the whole idea of God has been appropriated by the enemy in a weird
Mhm.
way.
Mhm.
And so I would also love for you to talk about that. I know I've just given you like 40 topics, but I would love to just hear your thoughts.
Yeah, that poem, you know, I do. So the process of collecting those things, I mean, I think one of the things I like to do, at least or I used to do, I don't really write zines like that zine anymore. But it's something that I think I might return to at some point. But of kind of in the tradition of like commonplace books, of just kind of collecting all of these voices to then kind of I think with that particular zine I was like, I'm from Atlanta, and so there's Atlanta is like a very strange southern city, and that is like very Black and very gay in a lot of ways. And so it's there's this way that I feel like when you're a marginalized person, and particularly a Black person, I feel like there's this kind of thing where it's like what people do with like LGBTQ. It's like, oh, you guys are all, you know, that rainbow, you're all together, as if like within that itself isn't incredibly complex. Like it's not, you know, it's almost like kind of summoned as like this symbol that everybody fits into it because everybody's queer. And it's like even within that, those alphabets, the L is a universe, the G is a universe, the T is a universe. And I think when it comes to like Blackness and Black queer people particularly, I think if you start getting into kind of pre-colonial kind of ways of, before there people were having a word for it, just kind of, I really with that zine wanted to kind of just zip time travel, find as much as I could about different perspectives, people who disagree with each other, people who don't speak the same language, people who you know, are living on different continents, you know, just to really think about like, not to be able to summon some kind of totem of like unity in some kind of flaccid little way that's like, oh yes, Blackness, like it's simple, you know. But to almost like, even for my own mind, just keep peeling it back and peeling it back so that you just get a sense of like how vast and broad it is. That it's not, and that's not something to be afraid of. It's got a lot of majesty and mystery there in it. That has a lot of places to explore, a lot of depth, and a lot of just like, I don't know, spaciousness. And I think, yeah, when she's talking about, I mean, I love her book. She has a book called Movement in Black. I've been running with Pat Parker's work since I was like 18. But all of that book, there's another poem in that book where she's talking to all these white lesbians who she's organizing with. And the poem ends in large words, sister, exclamation mark, in all caps. Your foot is smaller, but it's still on my neck. There's also another poem of hers that says, brother, I don't want to hear how my enemy is the system. All I know is the system you hit me with last night is called a fist. You know, so she really is talking about kind of, you know, you belong in, there's comfort in a community, you know, for marginalized people. For me as a Black person, there's comfort for me being with Black people. There's also tension because Blackness is not simple. It's not like everybody gets along just because you're part of a marginalized community. And so I really like that poem. And in terms of like, trying to make sure I get to all of the questions that you asked me, but it's funny because in some ways it's like sometimes when you're a person of color, it's like, or at least maybe I should just speak from my own experience, there's this way in which, but what you just said, that weaponizing religion, I mean, talk about, particularly Black queer people, I feel like so much of that zine is when it's talking about the transition from pre-colonial, particularly on the continent of Africa, to here. And then of course you see it with Indigenous people in the Americas, this kind of just grinding out of any kind of diversity of sexuality, any kind of diversity of gender. But that doesn't mean, and yet at the same time, there's a tension of, in my personal life, having this incredible, as an African-American Southern person, incredible transformation of, and syncretization of West African traditions in the Black Southern church traditions I grew up in, that was absolutely 2000% part of the reason that my ancestors, the ones who are living and the ones who I just know stories of and who names I just know, including my great-great-grandparents, like that's how they survived. What they did with this thing that was meant to actually kill them, was meant to actually, you know, have them take a blanket of dirt and lay up under it. So it's a tension. It's like, yeah, it's this weapon, but then people can use it and also make it their own, like the white supremacist kind of religious thing that people try to, you know, that they hand God is white, here it is, he loves you if you're a good one of those. And like, people have, can move around that, can see around that, can get around that and find these principles and things that, I don't know, enrich their lives, enrich their spirits, and actually give them the energy and the strength to transcend those things, destroy those things, dismantle those things. I think that's really powerful. But I do think in queer spaces, there's kind of like, oh my God, so many people have experienced so much violence, you know, at the hands of religious kind of ideology. They lost their homes, their families, etc.
Yeah, no,
Of like thing where people are like, oh God, oh sure, you know, but it doesn't have to be that way. But I understand why people feel that way. Absolutely.
no,
So
I
this
totally
why
understand.
I feel with my family, it's part of that, you know, for me too. And yet I see the benefit as well. Like I see what some people do with it, and it's beautiful. It can be.
That leads me, the next slide is the final page of the same zine that just at the top, it's a blank page essentially, join the convo, add your thoughts below. What would be your hope that someone puts on that page?
I have no hope about that
I
page.
hope you have hope. You give me hope.
Or the thing is, I think that it's just to kind of nod to the sense that this is just what I've collected. And it's always interesting. That's one of the things I miss about shows, because then people will have that book or come back to me later and say, oh man, I filled that page out and this is what I put in it. And it's interesting what people do put in it. And if anything, I just have a sense of wonder, like what it is that people would put in that page. What does come to them from all of that? What is the like, what impressed them? What touched them? What did they really deeply disagree with? What unsettled them? And I don't really know, you know, because I'm just making things from my own little strange world, broadcasting to you all live from Planet Golden. I really don't know. But I hope that they'll put whatever is meaningful to them. And I would, you know, pay money to have a zine of just those pages, people's pages, I could read.
It's really true. I think as artists, you lead people on a journey, but like it can be very surprising where people end up, even though they've gone on that same journey with you. They can arrive somewhere completely different.
Absolutely.
With that, I'd love to move on to Camilo. And we can bring up the next slide. And we'll start here, which is a image from Amigxs 1, which is, Amigxs is the zine produced by Camilo. And Camilo, I know this image in particular is part of a larger project, and we have another slide for this as well, which we can move to in a second. But I'd love, as an introduction, for you to sort of talk about this.
I'm sure. Well, Golden, I would really love to write on that last page of your zine this poem by Lucille Clifton, "Won't You Celebrate With Me," where she ends, "Celebrate with me that something has tried to kill me and has failed." And that poem I read it so many times in the last few months, and there's a very beautiful video of her reading that poem and just listening to her say those words. It echoes a lot of like the way I think of my body as a non-white person, and certainly informs my work. And what you're seeing here is the centerfold of the first zine, Amigxs, which was started by me in 2017. In an effort to go back to photography. I had not taken photographs seriously for about like 5 years almost. And I had a huge studio in a residency program in Brooklyn at ISCP. And I just decided that I wanted to go back to taking photographs of people who I love and people who I admire, and people who I desire. And so I came up with a list of friends and lovers that I wanted to photograph. And this is a self-portrait of me with three of my friends, Brendan and Carlos and Jorge, making out. And this zine came out of this desire for contemplating and thinking about ideas about friendship, but also, as many of you here in this chat or in this virtual event, many of us collect a lot of zines and a lot of publications from the past. And I have a pretty extensive archive of pornographic materials from the 60s. And one of those publications is a publication from around the mid 60s titled Amigo, which is the male single form for the word friend in Spanish. And so I decided that I wanted to recreate that publication. There's nothing about it, only the one publication that I have. And I decided to recreate it in its size. So the zines take on the form of the same scale of the original 1960s publication. And I've updated it by thinking more of inclusivity and intersection. So the title doesn't have a female or male ending, as in Spanish for amigo, amiga, and it's includes an X and an S. And for me, that X is a form of not only representing intersection and also gender inclusivity and neutrality and plurality, but also to reference the many ways in which through activist struggles, the X has been a marker that rejects white supremacy. For example, if we think of the Nation of Islam and Malcolm X and his decision to use the X as a form of rejection to his colonial white last name. So Amigxs and Latinx, for example, is a form of rejecting not only the binary of the Spanish language, but also to really reflect on the way that colonialism and white supremacy has dictated how bodies and people are defined. And this centerfold was also on view as a billboard in late 2017. And Paul, I don't know if you wanted us to talk about that in a particular way, or just for me to continue talking about.
Well, we can move to the next slide, and yeah, I mean, you can definitely talk about how this came about. I also, and we can sort of like move through the other slides as well, but I really think that something that's super interesting about your work. I mean, on one hand, I feel like it is part of a legacy. Like when I look at the photographs, I mean, immediately you can think of Mapplethorpe, but I think it's much more than historical than that. I think I see Manet and I see the Renaissance, but it's in this very new way where it's new bodies of different race, different genders. And at times I feel like the bodies are ambiguous, but I feel like at the same time that they're ambiguous, they're also very specific, because they're saying within ambiguity, there are specific spots. Like, you're not, like, someone that doesn't fit into a category doesn't mean that they aren't something specific. And I mean, that's what I'm seeing in your work. I don't know if that's an intent, or is that something you're thinking about?
Yeah, I mean, for me, the desire to go back to photography was to recreate this publication in a queer contemporary understanding of inclusivity and thinking of the variety of bodies that exist in our society, and to really reject whiteness as a formal category that dictates everything in our society. So this image that was the centerfold and that was the billboard was a desire to insert this image of queer desire into public space that informs or is in dialogue with the legacy in which of queer activists and artists using billboard in the public space to challenge, disrupt, and transform the politics of public space. And then in terms of just the formal decisions of how I photograph the people who I admire and want to celebrate through my photographs is definitely in reference to a lot of historical, art historical moments, certainly like Manet's Olympia, and maybe if we can go into the next slide of the following actually would be greater. Yeah, just like, for example, this centerfold of the last volume of Amigxs #3, published last year and launched at the Brooklyn Museum as part of an exhibition there last year titled Nobody Promised You Tomorrow, that focused on queer artists in New York City. This centerfold of activist Joshua Allen, who identifies as gender non-binary, in many ways, when I came up to their apartment in Crown Heights, I said, let's put up a bed sheet, and I would like to do this nude of you resting on this bed sheet. And for me, the way I was thinking about this photograph was both thinking of the representation of hermaphrodite historically through art, and also thinking of the non-male nude body in art, for example, like Olympia in Manet's painting. But for me, the representation of hermaphrodite through art history is one that is very interesting in the way that it disrupts the kind of heteronormative idea of gender. I mean, Sleeping Hermaphrodite at the Louvre is an ancient sculpture made out of marble found in the 1700s or the 17th century rather, and that the mattress of that magnificent ancient sculpture representing hermaphrodite was made by Bernini. And that historically at the Louvre, there's been this celebration of this one icon of that challenges our understanding of gender, and that was made so many years ago. So when making this photograph with Joshua, I was thinking a lot about those references and the ways in which non-male and non-female bodies have been celebrated through art history.
Thank you. That was such a great explanation. And it's beautiful to just look at the picture. I will note that we're sort of at an hour. I had other questions to ask the group, but I think because we're sort of at time, I will just sort of, first of all, I want to thank all of you who participated in this and everybody who came and watched. I will sort of throw out that in November, New York Queer Zine Fair will be doing a reading, and there's details about that to come. And hopefully we'll be doing another event in December, which is still formative. Again, thank you all so much. It really fills my heart and gives me hope that you are all working and that you're all such thoughtful and interesting people doing what I think is great work. With that, if you guys don't mind staying a couple more minutes, Kel, if there's a couple questions from the audience, that would be great.
There is, in fact, no audience questions. I mean, if folks have questions and they want to ask them now, they can ask them, but no one asked any questions as we were going through.
Okay.
But I did want to note one thing before I forget. We, in addition to cultivating our online directory this year for New York Queer Zine Fair, which you can find at NYQZF.com, we've also been collecting an ongoing list of queer zinesters of color that is also on our site. at NYQZF.com/. Sorry, I'm trying to like type and talk at the same time, and that's clearly not going well for me. We've been trying to collect zinesters of color, not just folks who are participating in the New York Queer Zine Fair, but you know, folks whose work we admire or people who have been referred to us. So I would say definitely check that out, send some money to these people and buy their lovely, amazing zines, because, you know, the folks on the list are making really incredible work in addition to our incredible panelists who are making amazing work. You should also buy their zines, and here's their websites. It's also, their websites are also on our page. We have an event page that lists all their info, and it's also on our directory. But also, if you are a queer zinester of color or know other queer zinesters of color who are not on our list, please send those our way. We want it to be a sort of ongoing, continuing building list to hopefully try and elevate the voices of queer zinesters of color. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, because I don't want to keep people longer than we promised, I will say I have tons of other questions for you, and hopefully we'll all get to chat again. Hopefully we'll be gathering in person next year. And thank you all so much for participating. I think I loved listening to you. I could listen to you all afternoon. And again, thanks so much for making great work.
Thank you for organizing this opportunity and for putting together such an amazing panel, and for just, yeah, providing space for queer zinesters. It's really impactful and beautiful and courageous, and had a lot of valor that you continue to do it even now in the midst of all of this.
And thank you. That's wonderful to hear. Don't make me emotional.
Emotional.
Okay, I think, are we signing off?
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank everyone for participating and coming to our horse and pony show. Dog and pony show? Some kind of show. There's animals.
Yeah. Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you,
guys.
everyone.